Okay, I think we should proceed. Colleagues, welcome to this DFMPC Professional Learning Series offered in conjunction and in partnership with CHSE. Shira, I hope you agree that these sessions, the series is moving along fairly well. We're still in a growth phase, but I think we're certainly getting some good value out of our engagements, and I know we're going to be able to do so today. So to remind everyone, of course, this is now we're linking these in collections of 3, as it were, these sessions around a particular theme, and each of those sessions is directed at a slightly different focus. The first being the Health Sciences Education Journal Club. The second is a Tech Tuesday, and the third as a learning workshop. I think a relatively successful combination to date. And then, of course, we are pleased to have the fourth in that group around the teaching portfolio and moving to an e-portfolio as well, which will be taking as a fourth extra after the 3 sessions, each of the 3 sessions together. So, of course, Paula, thank you so much for your time today, and we're delighted to have you on board as really one of our flag bearers of health sciences education for your quality and expertise that you've provided and experience that you have for the benefit of our students and faculty across the broader faculty. So thank you very much for your involvement in this particular series. And of course, we're kicking off with the Journal Club today, focusing on the broad theme of 21st century learning. And of course, when I see that the article starts off with, well, what knowledge is of most worth? Well, how can we not be excited about that prospect of engaging a little bit more around that subject? So thank you very much, Paula, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Richard, and thank you to Yanis and Shira for inviting me to be part of this session. I have to admit, this is the first time I've actually ever hosted a journal club session where I've been the one leading it. So I really aimed for this to be more of a discussion point, but obviously centered around a particular journal article, which I think Yanis did circulate to everybody. But if you don't have it, I'm happy to share it afterwards. So, and you'll look at the date of this article, and it says 2013, and you think, like, Paula, why are you sharing something that's been around for 8 odd years already? And the fact of the matter is that for me, this one is one of those journal articles that really give both the kind of critique, but also give the whys around having a 21st century framework, and whether it's in terms of learning skills or knowledge, it's still around thinking around the 21st century, and there is acknowledgement for the fact that we're a fifth of the way through the 21st century. So, this is not something to plan for the future. It's something that we should have been doing already, and thinking about already along the way. And your comment, Richard, about what knowledge is of most worth, I think is a really important one, because as the journal says, there have been times where people try and look at various knowledge domains, and decide which would be better than another. And is sciences more important than maths, or languages and arts more important, and that kind of thing. And so we try and influence what knowledge we think is of most worth, in a variety of contexts. And I think even as an occupational therapy lecturer, I always pushed the pediatrics agenda because that was my area of speciality, and so you're always grappling with what do they really need to know? What is of most worth? And so I think the nice thing around this article is that it really does look at more of the cross-cutting skills and an integration of understanding knowledge for the 21st century and 21st century learning processes. So I'm not going to go through the article piece by piece. I'm essentially going to offer a summary. So the image blurred a little bit when I tried to enlarge it from the PDF. I think the original quality of the image was not brilliant. But the entire article basically centers around a synthesis of 15 different 21st century learning frameworks. So they essentially looked at various reports, books that had chapters on 21st century learning or 21st century knowledge or skills, as well as publications and websites. I mean, they did a broad search and then they synthesized it down to 15 that had the most kind of comprehensive viewpoints. They offer a bit of a critique, in terms of how has learning changed and does it need to change? And at the end of the day, core knowledge is still core knowledge. You still have to transfer that knowledge to the student. So is there really a need for change? And their argument really centers around that while change is a constant and it doesn't matter that you've changed from the 20th to the 21st century. What is important is that you do need to be thinking differently, and our education systems stayed very constant for about 100 years. So I think that the fact of the matter is that there hasn't been sufficient change to keep pace with everything else that is changing. And there are two drivers for promoting the idea of a 21st century learning framework was really around technical modernization. So you can't just base your information on there's new technology, because the PDA was new technology. The cell phone was new technology, and a PDA no longer really exists. And cell phones have changed rapidly in the last 20, 30 years. So it's really about the ongoing technological modernization. And as we move from various forms of technology through to nanotechnology, we don't know what's coming next. We don't know what the tech modernization is going to be in the next year, 2 years, 5 years. And that's why an article like this, even though it is 8 years old, is still relevant, because they speak to the principles and the principles of change. And then the other thing is the advances in globalization, and how there is opportunity in globalization. There's opportunity in collaborating, and there's opportunities around understanding how to address real world issues globally, and not just within your own context or micro domains. So those were the drivers for them to really interrogate 21st century learning, and they, when they integrated, they basically came down to this broad structure, and the diagram is a nice simple view, but it hides a lot of complexity. Essentially, your foundational knowledge is what you need to know. It's your core content knowledge, which is essentially your discipline specific, what you need to do, what you need to understand and know in order to be able to do your discipline. It's your basic literacies and ICT literacy, as well as your cross-disciplinary knowledge. And if you have the article and you scroll right to the very end, it actually breaks down each of these into other into the subtypes of that knowledge. So, for example, in your core content knowledge, they look at things like academic standards, mathematical and scientific competence, financial and business literacy, quantitative literacies, environmental literacies, health literacy, civic literacy, and a disciplined mind, for example. Whereas in the the digital information and digital and information literacy, they're looking at things like your technological concepts and operations, the tools for interaction, information and digital competence, digital citizenship, which is quite a big thing in this day, with social media having its very high prevalence, and those kind of things, access, judgment, that type of thing. And then cross-disciplinary is quite an interesting element, because it's really around how do you integrate information from a variety of disciplines to enhance your own and create meaning. And they bring in the power of stories in this section, the power of networking in this section. So it's being able to understand knowledge from other disciplines and areas in order to enhance your understanding of your own field. So that's the what you need to know in order to perform appropriately. And then this meta knowledge domain is what we classically call the 21st century skills, or the soft skills, or the cost-cutting skills. But really, those are the things that enable you to act. So that is things like your creativity and innovation. And so within creativity and innovation, you're looking at things like entrepreneurship, playfulness, and play in inspiring ideas, design, that those kind of elements come into creativity and innovation, because it talks about that's your typical thinking outside the box. What can you do differently, and being able to apply it. Your problem solving and critical thinking skills, I mean, that involves obviously critical thinking, judgment, but it's having a sense of inquiry, looking at risk assessment, decision taking. All of those things fall within that domain. And then obviously your communication and collaboration. It is a skill to communicate to a specific audience in a way that's meaningful to the audience. It's a skill to work in a real collaborative team, and those two do work hand in hand, because obviously to collaborate you need good communication, you need negotiation ability, but the ability to work in a diverse team is quite important there. So these are the classic, what some people call the 21st century skills, and they're quite cost-cutting. To me, what also kind of fits in here is self-regulation, but it can also be argued that self-regulation fits in as a life skill and job skill. So this is kind of the how we do it. So this is what we know. This is how we act on it and how we do it. And then this is what we value, the humanistic knowledge domain. And the humanistic knowledge domain really looks at why what you do and what you know is important in the real world. And for me, that's the best way to kind of summarize it. So your life and job skills is what are the skills that are inherent in the job? What do you have lifelong learning abilities? Do you have the ability to multitask? Do you have leadership qualities? Those elements. The ethical and emotional awareness is really about being able to have ethical reasoning, empathy, constructive management of feelings, and your ethical standards and principles. And then your cultural competence is really looking at things like your global awareness, understanding of issues across the world. And this is where globalization is quite an important thing, because things like world hunger and poverty are global issues that create a variety of disparities between certain economies, the issues of global warming that affects everybody, although some people don't believe in it. I'm not getting into that debate. That's another debate for another time. The ability to communicate in other languages or with other cultures in terms of understanding and interpreting, understanding feelings, having civic competence. So, are you you effectively able to participate in your community and surrounding communities, and kind of the arts of negotiation for within that area as well. So essentially, you need to embed all of these in your learning processes. And I think if you step back, I mean, one of the questions that is posed in the article is that nothing has changed, but everything has changed. And I think when if you look at the surface of it, in health sciences, we are pushed to do these and to consider where it's happening. We have we take the students on rural engagements, we make them do community engagement projects. In therapeutic sciences, in OT and physio, our students need to spend a proportion of time in a local public health setting, in more high density living environments, as well as a public health setting, as well as in the hospitals and the clinic settings, etc. So I think we do engage with our real world environments, maybe more so than some other higher education degrees do. And we really, I mean, we make them study ethics. I mean, from first year, there's a bioethics component in all of our curricula. So, I mean, we have a foundational knowledge approach to many of these concepts, as it were. But the skill comes in through the lived experience, and we and exposing our students to actually grappling with the issues that are really happening around them. And I think one of the big things that for me jumped out was something like the OT students actually reporting the Isidameni crisis. They were one of the first to raise the problem of it being a humanitarian issue, because they were seeing a problem in the clinical placements that they were going to, and they couldn't cope with what was actually going on around them, and so that was part of the process, and that comes to this humanistic knowledge domain environment. So I think we definitely do have a component of this in our teaching, and but sometimes it's done from a knowledge perspective. These are the ethical principles, learn them. Acting them and valuing them might be another step that we need to consider. And then the meta knowledge things are often harder to embed. And for me, there are a couple of key principles if you're wanting to do this. And for me, the starting point is real world problem solving that has a real audience, that happens in a real context. Because if you're getting students to do a kind of a situational analysis, and then come up with a way of solving the problems that they find within the situational context that they go into, and they have to actually engage with the community, or the people that are involved. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to, I mean, it can be at an arthritis outpatient clinic, for example, and actually talking to the people in the clinic to find out what the actual issues are, what are the problems that need to be solved in order to improve their quality of life and their generalized health. So for me, the key to the meta knowledge domain really sits about making the students engage with the real world. And I think we spend so much time with assigned clinical prac where they have to do uh, you know um, uh, an assessment of an intake interview, assessment of the patient, intervention planning, intervention, and then monitor for output, and they deal on it on a one-on-one basis. I think the more we can get them involved in having to actually communicate with a broader audience, and a real community, and use the community engagement and collaboration, really work with a community in order to solve the community's problems, they will end up doing all of these. They'll become become creative in their solutions because they're thinking of things that can work for everybody. They will solve the problems. They need to be critical thinking because they need to look at what are the ifs and yeses in the process, and then they're going to have to collaborate and communicate what they've decided might work. Test it, use it, and really embed it in the learning process. And by that, they also they start feeling like they are agents of change. And so the value and meaning of what they've been doing, it ends up kind of fulfilling this cycle where, in my mind, and I see Scott has joined, we just to brag for 2 seconds, Scott and I, with Prof. Helen Miezwa, have submitted a chapter for a book, and we heard that it's gone off to the publishers about 2 days ago. But one of the things that we postulated is that, in actual fact, in our teaching, we need the foundational knowledge, the meta knowledge, and the humanistic knowledge not to be done as 3 separate components, but really to be overlaid on each other. And the more you can kind of bring these 3 circles together in what you're teaching, the more embedded, the more motivated the student is to learn, and the better they understand the whys and hows of what they're doing, and not just being core content focused. And even, I mean, that the importance of our IPE sessions is that they having them as a paper-based exercise versus having them in an actual clinical setting where we're actually dealing with real people, shifts that entire discussion, because they're asking different questions than what they would ask in a paper-based scenario. So that's my brief interpretation and summary of where this article is pushing and where it's making people think. So I think it'll be good to open to a bit of a discussion, if that's okay with Richard and the team.
Very much so. I wonder if anyone, thank you, Paula, for that good insights. And this seems like an excellent framework around which we can build a discussion. Are there any comments or questions for Paula? Of course, if not, Paula, then we can just presume that all of our attendees have got this down pat perfectly.
Or I put them to sleep. Sure.
Okay, I'm not going to let you get off easily, Paula. There's lots still to talk about with regard to this. So thank you. I think you gave a really good summary of the article, and I know it's an article that a lot of people base a lot of their curriculum design on, lately particularly, and so it's useful to be able to unpack in what area we're asking students to be competent. So how would you relate this framework really to the clinical competence framework that we're looking at now in terms of the HPCSA, and the tension that produces with the idea that we're wanting to have student-centered curricula? Because if we mandate a competence-based curriculum around all of these competencies, and I'm not just claiming the knowledge competency, but all the others, that really mandates for the student. It takes quite a lot of their agency away to be told, this is exactly what you need to know. So how do we embed these skills into life skills that then allows the student to develop their own agency with regard to their practice, rather than just following an HPCSA mandate with regard to competence?
And thanks, Shira. I think that's quite a complex question in and of itself. I think there has to be balance, and I mean, part of your foundational knowledge I mean, this is while it says knowledge, it is also skills action. I mean, it's the core that you have to be able to understand, to know the risks of doing things in a certain way versus the benefits of doing it in the way that's prescribed. And the health sciences has some very routinized skills that have to be learned. They, see one, do one, teach one is the older adage of it. But I think that the thing is the student actually has to understand why those competencies exist in the way that they do, and it's you can start them in demonstrations, and you can have online videos, but you need to have the scenarios around it where things go wrong, where if you do the skill the right way, or the competency, if you act on the competency in the right way, it embeds why that it was structured that way, so that it can be a backup. And there are times where things also go wrong. So, and especially in health sciences, we need to know how to act when what I've been taught doesn't work. And so unless we give them that real world exposure, which most of our clinical environments do offer, obviously we have to give them a number of hours. But I think if we start introducing that, obviously in the lower levels, you want them to learn the skill for the way it's being taught. But as they get older, get higher, our cases are not straightforward. I can't think of a single time as an occupational therapist, a pediatric occupational therapist, when I was practicing, where what I was taught was exactly what happened with a client, because each client presents with their own unique features. And I think that's where giving them the real world exposure is critical in our teaching. And I don't think we don't do that. I just think we need to know that health sciences is not a tick box exercise. And my fear with a competency based curriculum is that here's the checklist. Have you met the right order and the sequence, and have you ticked off that competency, in a brief summary.
That's terrific. Thanks. If I can just follow that with one more, although I don't want to take anybody else if they want to ask questions, go ahead too. But just an easy one to hit out the park. When we set objectives, and that's an exercise that I think all academics need to really spend time on, because it's something that we're not good at, having reviewed APDC documents quite a lot. Setting an objective is a decision from the academic's point of view of what it is they want the student to know. And a lot of the time it focuses on that foundational knowledge. So I want to know from you, in terms of developing these 21st century skills, not necessarily how the article unpacks it, but in your experience, which I know you have, how we would devise learning activities that would promote all these different skills, not just transfer content knowledge. Thanks.
Yeah, so in my mind, and I mean, you've got a sneak preview in what I'm going to say. In any case, because of the 21st Century Learning Design and Blended Learning in Higher Education short course, which was a quick punt of the short course is coming up soon. I think the reality is in knowing the methods that invoke these cross-cutting skills. So when you're creating a learning activity, you look for how much is a problem posed? Is the problem a real world problem, or is it something that you've artificially crafted so that the students engage with the foundational knowledge? Does it have a real world audience? So do the students actually have to go and meet people, or do they have to create a communication that goes to real people, not real people as being the rest of their class and you as the lecturer? So we spend a lot of time making students do things like write a 5,000 word essay on this topic. And the only audience for that is you as the lecturer. We also make them do presentations for each other. And so then the audience is their classmates. There isn't a real world audience for those. So whereas if you get them to go and speak to people at an arthritis clinic, or go and sit in at Stroke Aid, and spend an hour at Stroke Aid and communicate with the support, the caregivers, and the people living with stroke, and then come up with some easy strategies to improve quality of life, and then create a pamphlet in the language of the people that attend that Stroke Aid, or in 2 or 3 languages, make a pamphlet on how to do 2 or 3 things that would have an impact on their quality of life. Suddenly then they've still got to do all the research behind it. They've still got to understand what is inhibiting that person's way of life. They've got to understand stroke and the long-term outcomes of stroke. So they still have to understand the foundational knowledge behind. They still have to research the topic, but now they're doing it for meaning. So they're creating a communication, or working together in teams to create a communication that they can go to the next Stroke Aid session and actually circulate to the people where it has impact. And so if we're doing things for value, we're most likely going to stimulate these meta knowledge elements. So it does shift your learning objectives, but it doesn't. But you can also have learning objectives that relate to some of these things, and I think we don't really have, or maybe not so much learning objectives, but learning outcomes, so that what we do through the learning activity has an outcome of students being able to communicate to a real world audience, in a way that audience is able to receive it, not just in a way that they, oh well, I'm telling you this is how to do it, but in a way that makes it meaningful to that real world audience. And that would be how skilled communication has more of an impact than them doing a presentation of a pamphlet that they would give at a Stroke Aid, to you or to their classmates. So it really, to me, the key factor is housing it in the real world context, that condition or that practice point lives in.
Paul, if I may, Matty mentions in the chat how there's such a level of individuality that one needs to account for OT being such a client-centered discipline in terms of the example she uses. But so perhaps to comment on that, and the comment by Vinayagi, I think it is, who mentions how difficult it is to integrate this all. Perhaps you could comment on those two comments, and also from my side, are we? It strikes me that we're looking at moving from foundation knowledge to foundation value as a starting point potentially. Your comments, please.
So I think it is a combination. Look, to do all of this at an optimal level is also time consuming. What you could teach a student about participation, let's say OT treatment of stroke patients post discharge or rehabilitation processes, when you teach them in a lecture, versus making them spend the time talking to people who are living with stroke, it has a very different time spent. And so it does differ at the different levels, and you're not always going to be able to do it at the top level. They're not always going to be able to do a real world scenario. They're not always going to be able to not present to you and only do it in the real world context. But what I'm saying is that we have to have some of the real world context involved, and we have to have and I think we do try and structure it that way, but I think we need to do it in a way that we're cognizant that is what we're actually aiming at achieving, because then the way we evaluate what the student produces will also shift, because if what they're doing is found to be actually meaningful in context. And I think we do get their motivation through the value. I think it's a spiral. I think we need a base level of all of them. Like I was saying earlier, understanding ethical principles is something that is initially taught to you. It's a foundational knowledge, but understanding why ethics is important in practice is something that then builds your value in ethical behavior, for example. So they all, in my mind, they all work together, and at different levels of the curriculum we would embed different degrees of everything. So I think the example that I gave, it is just that, it's an example, and that example might have absolutely no digital or ICT literacy involved. I mean, you could literally hand draw it and come out with a real world communication. And if I think of the OT students on, sorry, I'm using OT as an example just because it's my home domain and I understand the core content knowledge better with it. But you know, on rural blocks, we often have to do education session to caregivers or mothers at nursery schools on feeding, or on you know, early childhood stimulation and growth and that kind of thing. And often the students draw posters that they then leave behind, so that it's an ongoing resource. But and so there's absolutely no ICT literacy, so you don't have to have all of these happening all the time in every learning activity. The essence is in understanding what you do have and what the potential is where you can bring in some of these elements. So yes, I do hear what you're saying, and it's really not advocating for a complete curriculum overhaul and change the way we do and don't have any classroom-based teaching anymore. That is not what I'm advocating for. What I'm advocating for is thinking differently about the way in which we teach, and when is the most appropriate to bring in different levels and degrees of these components.
I don't know, maybe we want to shake it up completely and then make mistakes along the way. But anyway, thank you, Paula. Are there any other comments or questions from colleagues on the call? Matty, I wonder if I might ask you, I think it's Doris Pierce that you were referring to in the chat, occupation by design. For those of us not familiar, I wonder if you might make a comment in terms of what you were getting at there.
So Doris Pierce, it's a very much an occupational science theory or framework that she uses, and obviously then it speaks very closely to occupational therapy. But the occupational by design thing specifically relates to what Paula is saying about contextual relevance or the real world relevance, that you design something that fits your patient in their context where they're at. And we actually linked, for the first time in ages, we actually linked one of our assignments for the students last year during the hard lockdown periods to that specific model to ensure contextual relevance and real world relevance to the students. If that helps.
Thanks very much. No, it certainly did. Thank you, Shira.
So yes, I think it's really lovely that we can integrate and have that discussion. The one thing that I want to say from a faculty developer's perspective, actually, is that lecturers used to focus on core content knowledge, and they saw that as their responsibility. Delivery of the content knowledge, and students must then do what they will with it, and that's the end of their responsibility. The change for me in looking at this as a triumvirate, I suppose you could say, of ways of helping students to achieve outcomes is that we're taking responsibility for a lot more. And if you speak to an old-fashioned lecturer and we talk to them about inculcating values or helping students to be creative, they would have given us pushback. But I do think that we're slowly creeping into this 21st century approach of teaching content knowledge is not my core function or my only function. And I do have to take responsibility. I have a responsibility of care, and I have a responsibility of professional value, and I have a responsibility for dealing with the environments that we find ourselves in, and not just saying, I can't function because the environment doesn't suit me. So I do think that having discussions like this is really useful, because it helps people to advocate for people to behave differently up there. And that's referring to colleagues, and it's referring to other people who have responsibilities for teaching. So well done for being here, I think, before a public holiday, but also well done for being able to share this kind of information, because it does help people become more mindful and become better practitioners. So thanks. Scott, are you going to pick me up on this?
Yes, thank you, Sharon, and good afternoon, everyone. And Paula, thank you for the presentation. Great stuff. As Paula said earlier, we're working on a chapter together, and Paula introduced me to Kereluik's article here in this the 21st century framework, and it really made sense to me. And I think COVID has shown us how we don't need to hold on to the foundational knowledge of what we always used to teach. I mean, here's a brand new thing, and we know nothing about it. So we cannot teach foundational knowledge. We have to teach the meta knowledge, how to act in a way to understand this new information, and the humanistic knowledge of how to place, value on this, a new virus, a new priority of health, limited number of ventilators, example, a rollout of vaccinations, the cross-cutting logistics that have to happen for academics in rolling out the program. I mean, it's the virus has really come into a way of showing us that we can rearrange how we teach, and developing the skills that students need of creative and innovation on that meta knowledge, the problem solving, the collaboration. I mean, 80% of our curriculum should be sitting with to act and to value, and then we teach them how to get online to find the foundational knowledge at the time that they need it, and that they're in the clinical setting with their tablet finding that knowledge, but they already have the tools of how to then place that knowledge, and how to put value to it. So it's great. Thanks very much, Paula.
Scott, thank you. I mean, it almost strikes me, Paula, that we're wanting students to gain the knowledge without even realizing it. Are we? At the same time, trying to balance the emphasis on knowledge where we need to.
So I think, Richard, part of the literacies element is knowing where to find information, how to scrutinize that information for value and real world application, and then how to act on that information. Historically, we had to teach them the knowledge. And it was, I mean, I always used to say to my students, remember, this is not the world according to Paula. Just because I'm telling it to you doesn't mean to say that you can't question what I'm saying, and I'm not the world authority on this. I'm someone who has experience, and I think I've studied it, but it is a changing domain. Knowledge is a changing domain, because there's new technologies that give out. There's new research that adds. I mean, if you think about the learning curves we've had around COVID, we've had to use information that we didn't know already. We've had to act on information that we searched for as we needed it. And we had to keep ourselves up to date in order to act in a way that created the best outcomes for everybody around us, not just in our professional lives, but also in our personal lives and in our social environments. So I think it's about not having such a fact-based orientation to our and memorizing and reciting based, but having a more, if you've got this information, how do you use it? Why is it meaningful? Where does it fit? And is it the right information to use? And so they need a core knowledge level, but I think we need to also build up the skill of how do you access the right information at the right time in order to act in the world in a meaningful way today. And so it's a balance of skills. And I think that, I mean, I've underemphasized the role of ICTs in all of this, but I think teaching the students where to access information is a vital component, because we're not as dependent on them filling their brains with recited information that they're spending so much time trying to remember what it is that they were supposed to do. Whereas if they can look it up in a much shorter period of time, and that the skill actually is in acting on that information, those are the kind of skills that we need to start looking at encouraging in our students, and posing problems to them, even basic problems at the beginning, where they have to research the information and come back to you with a response. It doesn't have to be in the real world to the real audience from first year. You can build on those and stagger it, but it is we do need to start thinking differently about where we act, how we act, and what we value in the process, and what the bigger picture is. Because I don't think we need to build lifelong learners, so we've got to equip them with the ability to learn for the rest of their lives, because things are going to continuously change. And I mean, part of these things are also things like flexibility and adaptability between the job skills and the meta knowledge, being able to cope when the world changes overnight.
So what I'd really like your comment on is, in medicine, in the discipline of medicine, or should I say the GEM program or MBCHB, and I note that Charlene's on the call, for example, who's involved on GEM 1 and 2. But in GEM 3 and 4, as well as 1 and 2, everything is so discipline specific. So there's a real inefficiency about gaining knowledge, because it's all, we've got these, everything, the program is also the rotations and the like, and the blocks or the modules. We've got respiratory, we've got cardiovascular, and then in the clinical side, we've got pediatrics, we've got medicine, we've got surgery. There's a real inefficiency to that, because then we don't get the time to to try to have a more integrated approach around the foundation knowledge that allows then us to have more time to integrate with respect to the acting with, and the value, the meta knowledge, and the humanistic is in your field. And I wonder if you're to comment on that. I mean, do you have it as fragmented in that way? And do you find that if you don't, which I'm presuming, I might be wrong, that then there is a way that you can integrate these elements more appropriately? We're grappling with that in medicine at the moment.
So Richard, my response to that is, firstly, that the whole point of problem-based learning was to break down those barriers originally. But it's very difficult to implement a pure problem-based learning curriculum, as I'm sure everybody here that's been part of a PBL curriculum. And I mean, OT still tries to do a PBL curriculum as authentically as they can, but the students still go for all the basic sciences separately, and they still go for the anatomy and physiology, medicine and surgery as separate domains and separate subjects. And I think it's the trick of any curriculum is that you have to slice the information in some way. There is always going to be some divisions, because you do have to you've got to be able to coordinate what happens when and build it. But I think that there is more opportunities for the foundational knowledge to start off cross-disciplinary, and then build towards speciality. And if you think about it, that overall that is what we do. If you take undergrad as a program and then look at postgrad and specialization courses, so on a broad strokes, we do that anyway. But it's there are things to think about in terms of crafting it, and I mean, one of the nursing education is in the process of starting to roll out their Bachelor of Health Sciences Nursing System Sciences track, which is a fully online course, and the idea behind that was that it's a concept-based curriculum, but that the foundational sciences were integrated within each concept. So if the concept was communication, for example, you know, health profession communication, so interviewing skills, those kinds of things, you would look at the psychology of nonverbal skills at the same time. You would look at, and if it was more of a maybe homeostasis as a topic, you would look at the different body systems and that kind of thing. So I think there's a number of strategies that try and address exactly that. What is the most efficient way to slice and dice a curriculum? And I think the difference with this framework is that it kind of advocates for questioning that might build on some of the interrelations between information, and it's building those bridges between the pieces of information. And I think the Loop project and mapping our curricula on Loop will allow us to also have a visualization of where we're over teaching, where we're cross teaching. Are there actually curricula or learning activities that are happening in a different department that might actually teach this content better than what I'm teaching it, and how can we collaborate and build those into our curricula? And so while the Loop project is quite a time-consuming project, and I think there's two, both Relay and Matty have gone through that process. I'm sure there's others of you that have engaged with it as well. It is time-consuming, but once it's all inputted into the system and you pull out a mesh code, you can see exactly where that's taught, at what levels, at what what the learning objectives are associated to those, and the degree of knowledge that those learning objectives are sitting at. So I think exercises like that will help us tie some of the threads together and maybe make different decisions around where the threads are, or which threads should be pulled.
Thank you. I'm not sure that I think you're mentioning the Loop project is it entirely valid, and we're going to be going through that. I think with Carol's good work around years 1 and 2 in the medicine degree program, we're going to be looking at that more seriously. And I'm reminded that we might want to look to some examples of the benefit that maybe Matthew and Relaine and others have found for having gone through the process, just in terms of our own sense of change management and understanding that a little bit. That might be nice to reflect on. But Scott, can I just turn to you again? I mean, we're reflecting on the medicine program, colleagues. I mean, Paula, with her experience in therapeutic sciences and the like, and comments on the chat from clinical associates perspective, share with us. I mean, do you think you've got some of this right in it, or not, for with your good work around the curriculum and this integration and things?
Yes, thank you, Richard. I think because we started really with an integrated curriculum, we weren't locked into the different silos, that we could bring in more of the meta knowledge and the humanistic knowledge. And I think we've been growing. Our tablets have kind of been a center of that we want students to access information on the tablets. So we've even had open tablet emergency medicine tests. Students come to the venue, they bring their tablets, they can access emergency medicine information, the slides, the PowerPoints, the clinical tools, and we create clinical scenarios of a patient case where they might have to go look up the risk stratification. They might have to go look up the ACLS guidelines to respond to the question. So we think that that's been working very well. I mean, only recently we started adding a medical humanities section where we're trying to bring in more of the understanding of the ethical, professional, medical kind of history, and the systems, which you guys are doing in health system science, bring that in. We have for quite a while really focused a lot on communication. Clinical associate is really well versed at communicating with their patient, and we've done a lot of counseling work there. But I think, you know, Viwe's on the call and Nabila, they could also answer us. I think we've tried to do this, you know, from the beginning and with stutters and starts. But I think overall it's going well.
Viwe, let's bring you in. You know, you've also done some good work around professional identity of the clinical associates. I mean, if we focus a little bit more on that in our curriculum somehow, and sort of driving in intentional learning, and well, just let me not put words in your mouth. Maybe you'd like to make a comment.
Yes, thank you. I agree with Scott. I think we are trying, and I think it can be quite overwhelming for the students. So if, you know, we're trying to continue and enhance the integrated curriculum, and you try and you build the foundation for knowledge, you build the foundation for the skills under the to act section, and we're now trying to build the values as well. I think it can get overwhelming for the student, and it would be important to assist them in that process, but more so to also assist them to take responsibility for their learning, and not just to sit back and watch us providing them with the information and the route, but they also need to be empowered to navigate this system.
Thank you, Viwe, and to Scott. Paula, let me a last word from you, perhaps. We're about to wrap up soon, for it being 5 o'clock. We're not done yet, are we? There's a long journey ahead of us for all of us, irrespective of discipline.
Absolutely, and I certainly don't have all the answers. I have some of the strategies in my tool belt, but I think it's a journey for all of us to take, and it applies in different ways in different curricula. I think it's more. If we all start bringing ideas to the table, which is what an environment like this is all about, is the sharing, that creates the communication and the collaboration, which is part of the steps for us. I mean, we're all still learning, so yeah, I think there are some really exciting opportunities. It's not going to change overnight, but I think, you know, my last word would really be around assessment. And I think, you know, as Scott said, bringing in the resources into an exam, we're so fixed that exams are memory based. And I really think we need to, I mean, obviously there's the skills assessments that either happen in clinical or as OSPEs, but I really think that the time of MCQs to test the core content knowledge needs to shift, because the MCQ might be right today, but it might be wrong in a year's time. And I think we equip the students better if we make them use their reasoning abilities and their access to information. A great example that for me always sits is the pharmacy department has they do an amazing race as a way to prepare students for their fourth year exams. And essentially there are different stations, they're in teams, they have to work together. It's an incredibly noisy event, but it's all driven on a tablet or iPad, and they get the team has to send one member to this station, and they come back, but they've got all their textbooks, they've got access to anything that they want to do, but they've got to solve the problem at that station, and their team can't move through until the team has solved the situation, and it's really fascinating to watch how they don't actually know where to find information in their textbooks, and these are the resources that they're learning out of. They'll have the textbook with all their tabs down the side, and you can see that they've highlighted, but when they've got to do it for meaning in a kind of a race which has that whole motivation to win component, they struggle, and those are the kind of stresses that I mean, this is in a eustress component because they're excited and that, but doing it when your thinking is challenged by context is quite an important component. And I think we spend so much time on recall and really not enough time on how you use information that you have at your fingertips. And I would really like to see exams structured very differently. And for me, this is one of the vehicles to changing that. That mindset. So that's my closing, is to think about assessment differently as well.
And thank you. So, and yes, assessment it needs to be thought differently and thought of differently, and we need to be creative around it. And I note Relane's comment in the chat around how the attitudes and effective behavior are missing from the curriculum, and in terms of learning outcomes related to that. And it's sobering to think that actually, yes, that needs to then be filled, but then we have to be able to assess those, the achievement of those, and is that not a challenging task, colleagues, that keeps us grounded and keeps us always thinking. Paula, thank you so much for your inputs and for guiding us today, or giving us these insights around this particular journal article. I'm really pleased for the engagement across different programs today, and thank you all for your inputs. I'm looking forward to the next two sessions, because surely, guys, we can, in the Tech Tuesday, the next session, and then the workshop going forward after that, we can start perhaps also applying our minds to some of the practical engagements, some of the tools, and some of the ways in which we might be able to practice what is certainly we're trying to preach. Yanis, am I correct? Are we looking to? I'm correct in that we've got this theme remains as in the 21st century learning for the next 2 weeks. Am I correct?
Yes, Richard. Although we're skipping, so we're skipping next week because Paula, next week is SAI, right?
Ah, yes.
So we'll
have that's why I asked that it's not next week.
So next week we'll have a SAI session where everyone can slot into a SAI session, and Shira will give information about that a bit later. So yeah, we'll communicate that on Friday or on Monday. And then the next session will be the Tech Tuesday, and the session after that, the workshop.
And then we can get stuck into some more practicalities. That's brilliant. I'm really excited about that. But let's give Shira the opportunity. So are we able to? Would that be asynchronous or synchronous? Are we able to link in with a session or next week, Shira, or what's?
Yeah. So I have been in discussion with a tech person, and I think that we can only we can link in synchronously to the presentation that's happening from 4 to 5. But just to give people who are not at SAHI a taste of what goes on there, SAHI being the national body of people associated with health science education. So everyone from around the country gets together and shares their practice and talks a little bit about research. And I think it would be nice to share an experience with the group of what's going to be airing next week, Tuesday, from 4 to 5.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's a fantastic opportunity. If ever there's a good reason to delay our own session, that's it. So wonderful. Thank you so much for coming up with that suggestion, colleagues. So thank you. So shall we close, colleagues? Thank you so much, Paula, again for your inputs today, and to everyone. Sorry, do I see Mervyn? Did you want to make a comment, Mervyn?
Yes, thank you so much, Richard. I joined the meeting a little late, but I've been overwhelmed by the excitement and the enthusiasm, A, of the team, and B, of the prospect of the new learning attitude. But as a clinician, I'm still very aware of the fact that we have no way of assessing the clinical acumen or the application of knowledge into a clinical environment. And perhaps I'm being a bit naive, but at some stage, could somebody please put that into perspective for me? Thanks so much. And thank you, everybody. It's been very stimulating.
Thank you, Mervyn. That's going to leave us nicely hanging for, I think, perhaps the following theme, which is integrating training into service, specifically around the clinical platform. So let's take that challenge up at looking at specific tools, by which we can achieve exactly that. Thank you, sir. Good. So thank you, everyone. Good evening to you, and we'll see you at Sahi 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock next week, Tuesday. Paula, thank you again.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Paula. Cheers, everybody.
Thanks, Paula. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.